I mean, I guess I would say that you don't go to the extremes that the Timberwolves did a few years ago, where they had Mark Madsen attempting three-pointers for the only time in his career in overtime in their Game 82, where they were in a similar situation to Miami, where they needed to lose to assure their draft pick. I mean, in Philly's case, obviously there's not a lot that they need to do necessarily to, lose games, just because of the talent that's on hand, especially if Nerlens Noel is shut down as he has been, and
he will not play tonight.
Yeah, so you're already without your best player, or at least your best defender at that point. I mean, I don't think you change things too dramatically. You've been playing young guys all season. Miami's in a little bit different state. I can definitely see you don't push any veterans at this point of the season. I don't think, but I just think that the nakedly obvious tactics to try to lose a game are where I really draw the line.
Kevin, do you think a game like tonight, in which we don't know what's going to happen, we don't know how it's going to play out, but aesthetically it could look horrendous, do you think the NBA is already concerned about some of these games, and could this game tonight be a game where they say, you know what, we don't want to put teams in this situation? I mean, Miami really has nothing to gain here. In fact, if they win this game, they could potentially lose their draft choice. I mean, why would they want to win this game?
Yeah, there's definitely no reason, and it's a much bigger incentive from Miami's standpoint. I mean, Philly would surely like to get the draft pick this year, but they know they're getting it at some point. It's not as big a deal, and of course the odds of them getting it, even if Miami were to win tonight, are still really low. It's still contingent on a coin flip and not jumping ahead in the lottery, things like that. Brooklyn needing to win their own game. So when you look at all those factors, there's much more incentive from Miami's standpoint. I mean, the thing is, there's been talk about lottery reform. Obviously, they're concerned about the perception of tanking, if not the reality of, teams trying to lose games at the end of the season, based on the proposal we saw last fall that got voted down. This is a slightly different scenario, though, because where you often see the largest incentives to teams to lose games is when it's a matter of whether they keep their pick at all or not. And I would be in favor of not allowing teams to protect their picks, except to the extent that maybe it's lottery or not in the lottery, because that to me would remove this kind of situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong. At one point, you consulted with the Indiana Pacers. I don't know how much in actually the front office that you dealt with day to day, but how does the front office, does Sam Hinkie get involved tonight and say, look, I need you to do whatever possible to lose this game? I don't want to accuse players of ever tanking a basketball game, but do you believe that there are times where people in that front office say, look, this guy's not playing tonight, he's got the cold, he's got the flu, I don't care what happens, he's out? I mean, do you think the front office influences some of these late games here?
I think that probably depends on the organization and the nature of the relationship between the front office and the head coach. I mean, obviously the coach himself is aware of what's going on with the standings. It's probably not as top of mind as it is for, the general manager and the other people in the front office. My experience actually was kind of funny in this regard. When I started with Indiana, it was the middle of the 2011-12 season, and I think their record was maybe 6th or 7th worst in the league at that point. And pretty much immediately after I started, they started playing much better after the trade deadline. And people were joking with me and other members of other members of the front office. But I heard this as well. Do you guys not understand how the lottery works? Do you not understand the draft? But that positive momentum that was picked up at the end of that 2011-12 or 2010 season, my years are off, and the next year the Pacers went on to make the playoffs within 2 years, getting to the second round and playing Miami. So, there is a value, I think, still to winning those games late in the season if it's with guys who are part of your long-term future. Yeah,
Kevin Pelton's with us, ESPN.com NBA, and look, I've said many times and I've said this for about 5 years now, that I think you should be rewarded for winning. The team that finishes first out of the playoffs, that team should get the most ping pong balls, because like you said, you want teams to develop and evolve over the course of the year. Yeah, a guy might have got hurt, or you might be young and got off to a slow start, but now you're encouraging losing. What plan or something would you like to see change? I know yesterday there was some talk about basically getting rid of the draft and having a cap system where, you're the worst team, so you would have the most money to spend on a drafted or a player that would be in the former draft, and if you were the best team, you would have the least amount of money. Do you have something or an idea to kind of tweak what's going on here? Because I hate that these teams are rewarded for ineptitude.
I mean, I think my main thought would be to make it multiple seasons, which apparently is coming to the WNBA at this point. So, that sort of incentivizes what we've seen in Philadelphia in terms of a long-term rebuilding process, but it also makes the outcome of one specific game less important to where you end up falling in the draft. And I think that's one of the things that really ends up mattering late in the season is, if one game is the difference between finishing 10th and 11th or keeping your pick and not keeping your pick, that's when you're going to see a lot more incentive to lose than, if it tweaks it maybe, a third of a percent or something like that if you lose an extra game, some meaningless number over the long-term course of things. My more radical solution would be, the real problem here is we want to help bad teams, but we don't want bad teams to know that we're going to help them, because that's the problem. They can't be aware of it. So my really extreme version would be, we decide based on losses beyond a certain point in the season, but the date on which that starts is determined after the year by some sort of random lottery, and therefore you don't know whether the game you're playing is even going to count or not towards the lottery standings.
Very interesting there. I like that a little bit, where you're basically saying, hey, you don't know if you're being evaluated from this point forward. That is very intriguing there. Kevin Pelton, ESPN.com, taking a look at the game tonight between the Heat and the Sixers. We'll also look at some of the NBA playoff matchups, because there's, in the East, it's not as bad because Brooklyn doesn't have a first-round pick, so they have incentive to want to be in the playoffs. On the Western side, does Oklahoma City want to be the 8th seed, or do they say, you know what, just not our year, we'll sit this one out?
I don't think it matters too much for them at this point in terms of the draft pick. They'd pick 14th if they end up missing the playoffs. Really slim chances of them moving up into the top 3 in the lottery. Otherwise, they'll pick 17th. It might have been different. Their pick is top 18 protected, so there was a scenario where they could have picked, been between 19th and losing the pick, and 14th if they were out of the playoffs and in the lottery. Then it might have come into play, but I don't see too much concern about it at that point. That is one thing I think, though, that you have to watch as people propose various solutions. If it's something like in completely even lottery as it was originally, where the best team that misses the playoffs has as good of a chance as the worst team, then I think that's where you start seeing more incentive for teams to miss out on being the 8th seed and probably getting swept.
How big of a deal is this for Miami? They didn't make the playoffs this year. They're obviously they lost LeBron, so they took a big step back here. But this game tonight for them, is this a big deal for them?
Well, the reason I think it is a big deal is because you'd expect that next season with a healthy Chris Bosh, assuming they can re-sign Goran Dragic, they're a team that's probably in the mix for the top 4 or 5 seeds in the Eastern Conference, probably picking in the late teens or even in the 20s. So this is probably the best their pick could possibly be. And that's, again, where I think you see a lot of incentive to teams to keep their pick. The situation I would compare it to is a few years ago during the lockout season. The Warriors had a lot of injuries with Steph Curry in particular. They traded Monte Ellis at the trade deadline for Andrew Bogut, who was already out for the year, and they really aggressively tried to lose games during the last week of the season to make sure that they would keep their protected pick, which they ended up using on Harrison Barnes. And I believe it was 8th at that point. If you would have gone to the next year, they picked something like 24th because they took such a big leap forward.
Obviously the Sixers have their own pick, which can move up if they lose the game tonight. And if they lose the game tonight, they can also get the Heat pick, at about 50-50 chance of that happening, depending on what happens in that Brooklyn game. Would you say that year number 2 of what the Sixers are doing has been a success?
I think it has, just because of the fact that you've started to find guys who look like they can be part of the long-term future of this team. I mean, obviously Nerlens Noel, as well as he's played in the second half of the season, you look at him as a key piece going forward. Then Robert Covington, what he's done this year as a scorer, a guy who can score efficiently despite the large role he's been asked to play. He's going to be part of this roster in some form or another, 2-3 years down the road. And I don't think those guys were on the roster necessarily last year. I mean, Michael Carter-Williams is probably the only guy who was playing games you would have said that about, and obviously here we are a year later, and he's not even in Philadelphia.
Are teams around the league, do they like what Philadelphia's done? Do they want to emulate what Philadelphia's done? What is some of the scuttlebutt around the league about what Philadelphia's done? And or what they're doing, is it different from New York and Minnesota?
Yeah, I think it's different because of the fact that those teams went into the season expecting to be playoff team or compete for a playoff spot at least, and then we're kind of unexpectedly surprised by their injuries and not playing up to their own expectations. And I think that's kind of always been something that NBA teams have done. This is, I thought it was well put on the BS report the other day that it's a self-aware rebuild. Like the Sixers are very conscious of every step they're taking, and that's what makes it different from a team kind of falling into being this bad by accident. Having it be strategic. So it's definitely controversial around the league. I mean, I think there's as much debate among NBA people about whether this makes sense, whether it's a good idea, whether it's going to work, as there is among fans.
The NBA has said that they, are perfectly okay with it. Do you believe that? Do they look at Philadelphia and say, we cannot have this happen with another franchise?
Yes and no. I mean, I think we haven't seen it turn out as extreme as some people feared with, or are they going to set the record for most losses? I mean, they've actually, we're coming up on 2 years here where neither year they are going to have been the worst team in the league. So, from that standpoint, I don't think it's a huge deal in the NBA's eyes. But, like I said, they did try to pass lottery reform. Adam Silver was behind that last fall. So clearly there is some concern about, the incentives and the way they are built right now.
Kevin Pelton's with us here on 97.3 ESPN, ESPN.com NBA insider Kevin Pelton, at KPelton on Twitter, as the NBA playoffs. Tonight's the final night of the regular season. The 8th seed in the East is up for grabs, and the 8th seed in the West is up for grab. And obviously, everybody really keyed in on these Western Conference playoffs. But I want to talk about Boston real fast. And the job that they've done and the assets that they have. Is Boston a team that seems like they've played the game, I don't want to say the tank game, but whatever, the way that they've acquired assets and then won in the process? Is that a team that teams want to emulate?
I think so, in terms of being able to accumulate a lot of draft picks without completely going to the bottom of the league, and now having the opportunity to go back to the playoffs after just 1 year out. I think definitely, not everyone has the opportunity to start their rebuild the way that Boston did by getting multiple lottery or potential lottery picks from the Brooklyn Nets and that deal for Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett. I think that's one of the things that kind of set them apart from Philly, where you were starting at a point where they didn't have that much in the way of assets. Pretty much just a Drew Holiday is a guy that they could get value for in return. I think that's one of the big differences. But, Boston's been really strategic about trying to get value whenever possible, and they saw that with Isaiah Thomas at the trade deadline and were willing to, take the hit to their draft pick this season for the opportunity to get back into the playoffs and have Isaiah Thomas on a really team-friendly deal going forward.
If Indiana gets in tonight and plays Atlanta, a lot of people look at Atlanta with 60 wins, Atlanta with Indiana with 39 if they win tonight. Does Indiana scare you if you're Atlanta?
I don't think they quite go to the point of scaring me. I mean, maybe if Paul Millsap is really bothered by his shoulder injury and is unable to play. It is amusing that it's such a complete opposite from last year, where Atlanta gave Indiana a scare in the opening round as the 8th seed when Indiana was the 1. But with Paul George's minutes still limited, we saw how badly they struggled to score last night against Washington in that double overtime game. It's hard for me to see them beat Atlanta 4 times.
Is there another upset in the East, or do you think all the favorites play out?
I think all the favorites probably play out. Washington, Chicago, if that comes to pass, could be a really interesting matchup because, the Wizards have given the Bulls a tough time. in the past, obviously last year in the playoffs, but it looks at this point like Chicago is probably going to finish third, and I think they should be able to handle Milwaukee, and I think Toronto matches up pretty well with Washington, but that's clearly would be the most competitive series.
And how about the 8th seed in the West? Who do you think gets that one, the Pelicans or Oklahoma City? Because I know Oklahoma City's got Minnesota tonight, and obviously New Orleans plays San Antonio, who's been known to sit guys from time to time.
But probably not tonight, because they're still playing for that 2nd seed in the Western Conference, which they would secure with a victory. So I like San Antonio's chances of beating New Orleans, and then it'd be pretty stunning if Minnesota were able to pull the upset on Oklahoma City, as banged up as they are at the end of the season. So yeah, I think Thunder probably in the 8th seed ultimately. Is
Golden State a team that that you think is a clear favorite in the West, or are the Spurs still the team that you'd put your money on?
I think the Warriors are the favorites. It's no longer clear. I think maybe a month ago it was Golden State and then everyone else a tier below. Now I think San Antonio has put themselves in that conversation with the way they've played.
Any team in the West a dark horse? I mean, I think we all look at the Spurs and the Warriors, and I know a lot of fans would say the West is clearly top to bottom very deep, but is there a team in that Western Conference that you think is a dark horse that people don't talk enough about?
Well, I think one of the things we've seen is because of injuries and teams just struggling down the stretch, the ranks of teams that legitimately can win the Western Conference has been thinned out pretty considerably. I mean, it'd be hard to see Portland doing it at this point with their injuries. I'd be surprised by Memphis, despite the fact that no one really wants to play them in the playoffs. So that leaves, I think Houston has a legitimate shot at it if Dwight Howard is healthy and plays well. And then the Clippers are the premier dark horse, the way they've played, the last couple of months, where they've been a top 10 defense to go along with one of the best top 2 offenses in the league. That's a combination that can win you a lot of games in the playoffs.
All right, Kevin Pelton, ESPN.com. The NBA playoffs start Saturday right here on 97.3. And Kevin, throughout the playoffs, we hope to check in with you some more. Thanks so much, man.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.